Hello, ISSRM. This is Chris Sahowski speaking to you from Norfolk, Virginia at Old Dominion University, and I'm so happy that I'm able to visit with you today. I wish we could all be in Australia in person together for this conference, but this will have to suffice. Today I'm presenting research on behalf of Megan Roberts at Parks, Recreation, and Tourism in Chesapeake, Virginia. Megan's thesis work comprised the majority of what we'll be sharing with you here today. I'm also presenting work on behalf of Jeffrey Skibbons at East Carolina University and Nicole Leach. I'll be turning off my video for the rest of the slides and look forward to sharing these findings with you. So it should come as no surprise to ISSRM attendees that visitors to parks and protected areas are captivated by charismatic megafauna, or large mammals. Our research focuses on black bears in coastal North Carolina. However, in the United States, in North America more broadly, and across the world, individuals are attracted to these large mammals, often at close proximities that can be complicated and can be dangerous both for the megafauna but also for the visitors themselves. This seemingly innate propensity to view bears up close has been exacerbated historically in the United States by the presence and the permission for public bear feeding sites in protected areas. So some of these pictures are from Yellowstone National Park, where garbage dumps allowed bears feeding opportunities and humans opportunities to view those bears. And these types of management regimes allowed for food habituation, where bears would be acculturated to the regular presence of human food in certain settings, as well as human habituation, where bears became used to humans at close proximities. And obviously this is problematic for a variety of reasons, and a variety of scientific advancements have moved us beyond these problematic management regimes to decrease bear encounters, at least in these settings, and move us towards wildlife-centered management practices. But even with these advancements, people still get too close to bears. If you follow social media or news about social media, you'll know that bear selfies are a thing, people trying to get close to bears to get that desired pro pic. And so we still see this desire for proximity creep up. We still see these risky situations in bear viewing, and managers are trying to understand why these occur and how best to deal with them. And so one way to approach these needs is to use the normative thresholds method. And so folks in a variety of fields across a variety of continents have used normative thresholds to understand desired viewing distances to charismatic megafauna, including bears. Our research today focuses on one unique area in coastal North Carolina, Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, where there's a large condensed population of black bears. This population of black bears exists in this space due to the crop surpluses that exist on the refuge. About 25% of the crops are left on the refuge, are not extracted, and bears and other wildlife are able to enjoy foraging for those leftover crops. There's also no hunting on the refuge, which provides a safe haven for black bears. But the secret is out. Folks across North Carolina and the southeastern United States know now about the large population of black bears and the ample black bear viewing opportunities that exist at the refuge. And the same challenges for close proximity that we've seen historically in the United States, but also currently in other protected areas, exist at the refuge as well. This led Megan and our research team to want to understand visitors' acceptable proximity thresholds for black bear viewing at the refuge. Additionally, given the literature on normative thresholds for wildlife viewing, we wanted to ask a few methodological questions. First, we were interested in how viewing order might impact these thresholds. If individuals saw more bears first in a series of photos, would they react differently than if they saw just one bear first before seeing other photos of multiple bears? Additionally, we were curious if photos of bears and self-reported questionnaires provided the true story of what was actually happening on the ground. So we wanted to understand what were the actual behaviors of visitors during black bear viewing experiences. So in the summer of 2018, Megan participated in a mixed methods sampling effort over 2 months at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. Part 1 of her effort was a stratified sample that administered a questionnaire, a norms-based questionnaire, over 31 days to 304 respondents, so around a 73% response rate at the end of that sample. Part 2 was behavioral observations. So on different days than Megan conducted her questionnaire sampling, she went out in the field and recorded encounters of visitors with bears. And she used a rangefinder to determine visitor proximity to bears in those viewing situations. At the close of sampling, Megan came back to the lab and computed descriptive statistics, chi-squared analyses, repeated measures ANOVAs, and a variety of other statistical tests. She also analyzed PCI2 values in accordance with standards in the normative literature. For slightly more background on how she created these questionnaires, I want to share a little bit about the photo elicitation practices that she followed. Prior to administering the questionnaire, we created 2 photo panels based off of pictures we captured at Alligator River. These 2 photo panels depicted either one bear or one bear and 2 cubs at 4 different distances: at a 75-yard distance, a 50-yard distance, a 25-yard distance, and a 15-yard distance. There were no bears present when we took these pictures. A stationary object was placed at these different distances, and the bearings were shot with a rangefinder, and then bears were photoshopped into the pictures back in the lab. When participants saw these pictures, they were presented in a randomized order to reduce photo order bias, but they were presented in a complete collection. So all of the one pair bear pictures were seen together, and all of the one bear and 2 cub pictures were seen together as well in a crossover design. The crossover design is depicted here. Visitors were randomly placed into 1 of 2 sequences where they either saw the 4 one black bear pictures first and then the pictures of cubs, or the pictures of cubs first and then the pictures of one black bear. To understand the actual behavior of visitors on the refuge and to see if the actual behaviors corresponded with visitors' self-reports when they observed those photos that depicted different distances, Megan spent 30 days as a participant observer traveling the refuge looking for bear jams, or collections of individuals and vehicles observing bears. When she found those bear jams, she took on a participant observer role, and she also noted the time of observation, the numbers of adult bears, cubs, visitors, and vehicles, and she used a rangefinder to calculate distances. So she looked at the distance between herself and the bear, the distance between the closest visitor to the closest bear, and the distance between the closest vehicle and the closest bear. So she calculated a few different distances based off of those bearings that she shot. And then she also created qualitative observations of encounters that were later coded by 2 of us back in the lab for overt reactions, where a bear would respond to human presence. And those were calculated using a Cohen's kappa statistic. So after all of that preparation, and after 60 days of traveling the refuge, we returned to the lab and synthesized a variety of findings, some of which we'll be presenting to you here today. We don't have time to share all of them with you, but I do want to share the highlights as they relate to the research questions that we've outlined. So first, the social norm curve followed a fairly standard amplitude and fairly standard distribution, whereby closer pictures were less acceptable than pictures that depicted distances far away. And this is for the social norm curve where one bear was depicted. So this is just one bear. We also plotted two curves. So there's the two different sequences depicted in the crossover design where individuals might have seen either cubs first or cubs second in that crossover design. So this is just the evaluation of those one bear photos, but we've split out those two curves based off of the two different sequences that we applied. We ran a two-way repeated measures ANOVA on these data, and we found that our treatment, our different photos that we showed folks were significantly different. So photo 1 yielded significantly different responses than photo 2, then photo 3, and then photo 4. So we designed our photos appropriately. However, we found there was no difference between pictures of cubs viewed first or second in this one bear photo set. So there was no difference in the one bear photo set. Finally, because there was no statistically significant difference, we calculated the point of minimal acceptability. So when the average of the two curves crossed the neutral line, and that was at 44.5 yards. So that would be the minimal point of acceptability on average for the sample. The pictures of a sow with cubs followed a similar pattern, whereby the amplitude was similar. The photos all elicited significantly different acceptability scores. However, the main difference I want to highlight here is that there was a between subjects difference. So depending on which sequence you saw, you assigned a different acceptability threshold. So folks who saw the pictures of cubs first, before seeing the single black bear photo panel, said that it was acceptable to be closer to a black bear with cubs than the folks who saw the black bear with cubs pictures second. So depending on what order you saw the photo panels, you might share a different distance that was acceptable for viewing a sow with cubs. And that was a significant difference found between those two photo panels, although the partial eta square value has a small effect size. So after calculating those self-report data, we wanted to understand what visitors were actually doing. And so after traveling the refuge for 30 days and encountering bear jams and taking behavioral observations, Megan analyzed those observations, and we display those here in this frequency distribution. So the distance in yards is presented on the x-axis in 5 different groups that correspond to the thresholds, or to the pictures that were created in the norms panel. So we have distances between 15 and 26 yards, for example, is one condition. And what you'll see here, as you look at those percents of the sample, it's disaggregated or segmented across vehicles inside and outside the vehicles. What you'll see here is that there were a lot of folks who were farther than 75 yards away from bears. So given the long distance viewing opportunities at Alligator River, there were folks who were pretty far away from bears, which is encouraging from a human-bear interaction perspective. What you'll also notice is that the next largest segment of folks was closer than 16 yards to bears. So if you were outside of your vehicle, if you were a visitor to Alligator River and you're outside of your vehicle, if you could have been the 21% of folks who were closer than 16 yards to a bear, which is obviously fairly problematic. Additionally, we took these data and we tried to understand how the behavioral observations worked with the visitor-defined, self-reported 44.5 yard threshold that we observed in a few of the norm curves that we just saw. And what we found was a pretty striking bimodal distribution where almost half of folks were closer than the minimum acceptable threshold. So they were below that 44.5 yard threshold. But also almost half of folks were farther than 75 yards away. So we noticed that there's this bimodal distribution with two modes of folks who are either pretty close or pretty far away, and there really aren't a lot of folks stuck in the middle. We also noticed after coding Megan's qualitative observations of reactions of bears to visitors that there were roughly 30% of all observations where bears were reacting to visitor presence. So another way of saying that is in 70% of the observations, bears seem fairly well habituated to human presence regardless of the distance. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, what we found was that we were able to expand our understanding of visual-based indicators and thresholds methods, meaning that we were able to more accurately understand what was happening in this unique setting, but also whether or not this method complies with actual behaviors at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. Specifically to the self-reports, proximities under 44.5 yards were deemed unacceptable. However, we find that there's a large discrepancy between what people are saying about that threshold and what they are doing. So we make sense of this in a couple different ways. First, it's possible that we have two different segments of visitors represented in our sample. The first segment is folks that have a low risk tolerance. So they may be very nervous about being close to bears, or they may be more ethically sensitive to close proximities. And as a result, they're farther than 75 yards away from black bears. Then we have the other part of our sample that is below the minimum reported acceptability threshold of 44.5 yards. And these folks might approach those bears outside of their vehicles, even at those close proximities. So it's possible that we have these two different segments that are doing two radically different things that the averages that we presented before simply don't describe until we segment them out. The second thing that we posit is that we are showing you the difference between descriptive and normative decision making. So descriptive decision making illustrates what people do, and normative decision making illustrates what people think they should do. And our self-reported questionnaire captures that should, whereas the descriptive behavioral observations capture what people actually do. And so there may be an incongruence between this normative method in capturing actual norms, actual behaviors. And we know that this is true in other settings that investigate environmental behaviors and environmental decision making. There is a limitation of self-reports to describe behaviors that might be either illegal or unflattering, and as a result, individuals may change their reporting to appear more socially desirable. So these are other reasons why we might see this incongruence between what people say and what they do in terms of black bear viewing at Alligator River. Moving forward, we feel these findings provide a variety of implications for Alligator River managers, as well as the research community that uses indicators and thresholds to understand desired proximities, as well as other visitor behaviors. First, we feel these findings provide the opportunity for Alligator River to create distance recommendations. The refuge is understaffed and as a result cannot create regulations with fines or any direct management attached to them. However, these findings provide the opportunity to use the 44.5 yard threshold and interpret around it, both to visitors who may approach bears below that threshold, as well as to other visitors who may approach at farther distances. Next, we feel that findings coming out of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem that use volunteer efforts, such as a wildlife brigade, may be transferable to this setting, where volunteers could be used to interpret and inform the public of acceptable distances. And then finally, we find that this method of indicators and thresholds for measuring proximity to charismatic megafauna may need a mixed methods approach to illustrate validity across different settings. We found that at Alligator River, there was less external validity of the self-reported threshold given that segment of visitors who approached at close distances. So we encourage future researchers and managers who are using indicators and thresholds to find other methods to pair with this indicators and thresholds methods to confirm the validity within these unique settings. With that, we just want to say thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions about methods or about Alligator River or anything we've presented here, feel free to reach out at the email addresses on the left-hand side of the screen. And we hope you stay safe and sane during these crazy times and hope to see you real soon.